Hi guys, Grandma here. I just got to the dentist, so if my mouth seems a little bit strange, I'm kind of numb. But I wanted to continue here about our study on Rome in chapter 60. So we started in just a little review. We're going back to Rome, back to right before the first century, before Jesus was born. And we're going to be talking about how Rome took over the whole world. Over 1 million people would stretch from Africa through the Middle East all the way to north to the English area. Huge amount. The reason it probably spread is because there were so many new roads put in. The Romans were very good at paving roads and putting roads in to travel. So people were traveling then all over toward Europe and the Middle East and Africa. Rome also had the greatest army, and they were known for their bravery for protection in many areas. And also, they were the greatest builders. They built the Colosseum and all these big buildings, but they also were known for building a lot of apartment complexes. Before that time, they rarely had apartment complexes that were very high. They started building up into the 5th story, and then they said, well, maybe we can build them higher. And they actually put laws on building the apartment complexes too high. So people were moving into the cities like mad, especially Rome. Romans were really good at taking inventions from Greece and from Egypt and applying it to their own lives. They even borrowed their gods and gave their so-called gods new names. Can you believe that? The government was a representative system, although throughout Roman history, I see the emperor had major control. Although the government that was set up was supposed to be represent the people, not only the middle class, but also the higher class. Although Rome had tons of slaves that had no representative at all. So when we go back to the beginnings, I always like to kind of review about one of the first Roman Caesars, and his name was Julius Caesar, and this was a time before Christ was born. Julius Caesar was a military genius, and he was so loved by his soldiers, and he also was loved by the Roman middle class. But because he was such a hero, so to say, the Senate representative government and the senators did not really like him that much, because they didn't want a certain ruler to get too much control. Well, Julius Caesar, he was ruled with another guy, actually the other guy was named Pompey. And Pompey was his son-in-law, which means he was married to Julius Caesar's daughter. But they didn't get along too well, and they ended up going into a civil war, means fighting among themselves. And Julius Caesar, actually, he crossed a river to attack Pompey, which was like, oh my goodness, they're having Romans attacking Romans. And he crossed the Rubicon. So even today they say, crossing the Rubicon, you've gone too far. So he did that. And then the war went on with Pompey and Julius Caesar. And it went into Africa. And we have the story in Africa where the Egyptian queen and her brother actually killed Pompey because they wanted to support Julius Caesar. And as Julius Caesar came into Egypt, he saw the great pyramids and the beauty of the Nile River there, and the beautiful queen, and I'd say she's more like a pharaoh, and she actually made herself a god. Her name was Cleopatra, and she was the last of the Cleopatras, actually. And he fell in love with her, and they end up having a child. And as he stayed there in Africa, the people in Rome, they're like, oh, what's he doing over there in Africa? He's supposed to be here ruling us. And so they got a little bit upset. So when he ended up coming back, the Senate actually got together secretly and connived against him. And they assassinated Julius Caesar. It's a terrible story, because some of his best friends were actually involved in all of this. And at the end, you always hear this saying, "Et tu, Brute?" And that is basically him saying, "Et tu, Brute?" Is you too, Brute? It's a pretty sad story because I believe Julius Caesar had very good motives. It's one of the only good Caesars in the whole list as you go through. But his son, Octavius, well, actually, it was his nephew, Octavius. His son gained no power, and come to think, he was probably assassinated. But his nephew was named Octavius, and he was young. When I say young, he was probably in his early 20s. And he took over from where Julius Caesar left. Octavius ruled a long time, like 40 some years, while Julius Caesar only ruled like 4 years. But Octavius changed his name to Augustus Caesar. You see his name in the Bible because he was Caesar the time that Jesus was born. Octavius took over Cleopatra and Mark Antony, and he took over total control. During this time, he did do some good things. He helped support the poor, and he built more things and the roads, and he started what was called Pax Romana. Pax Romana means Roman peace. Well, when I look at it, there was Roman peace for some of the Romans, but a lot of the Romans still had very little peace. In fact, during this Roman peace that goes on past Augustus Caesar's time, we see Jews were really not at peace with Rome at all. In fact, we see almost the total annihilation of Israel during this time. They were persecuted very badly. As we go on, one of the later Caesars actually burned Jerusalem, and another Caesar actually went in and salted the land put salt on the ground in the land of Israel so nothing would grow, and cut down the trees and made it a very barren land. And another Caesar actually named it Palestine for the Philistines, which were Israel's arch enemies. So there was a lot of persecution against Israel. And then there was the persecution that happened starting in Augustus Caesar's time all the way up to 300, where Constantine outlawed persecution. And you know who these people were? They're Christians. They were persecuted this entire for 300 years. But during this persecution, as I told you before, they went underground and they witnessed and they shared the gospel no matter what, even though it was against the law, because they loved God so much. And during this time, you can see major amounts of people, Christian people, were put to death at the Colosseum, and they were burned at the stakes, and they were crucified, and all these terrible things that happened. Yet God came through magnificently during this time. So when I say peace, I just really? Was it really peaceful? Not for a lot of people. Another group of people that it wasn't so peaceful with was the slaves. You know, there were a few million, I think, up to a few million slaves in Rome. And they weren't treated too well. In fact, they were bought and sold at the slave markets. It was not a good place for a lot of different people. Well, then going back to the Caesars, they were a motley crew. I'm going to show a little video in a little bit, and it's going to go through some of the Caesars just to tell you how crazy some of them were, you know, and some of the atrocities they did. But a lot of them were good builders, and a lot of them tried to promote Rome and conquering other lands. They were pretty good militarily. When we go through the Caesars, just a few Caesars I was looking. As I go through, there was a Caesar. Tiberius was one of the first, and he was very suspicious of people and paranoid, and he had most of his advisors killed for no reason. We have Caligula, who basically made his horse to be a consul for the Senate. Probably as a joke, I don't know, but maybe he really thought his horse could speak, I don't know. And then there was Claudius, and Claudius loved partying, the big parties and feasting and gluttony, and he did not do much really for Rome during that time. His wife poisoned him with mushrooms and made her psychotic, evil son, who was a total sociopath. I mean, he was totally crazy, and his name was Nero. Nero, the first thing he did was killed his mother. That's how bad he was. He was an actor and a musician, very poor actor, very poor musician, and he played the violin or played the fiddle or whatever really terribly and made everybody listen. They all had to say, oh, and they all had to clap or he would have them killed. And then when Rome burned down during his reign, most part of Rome, I should say, burned. While Rome was burning, everybody came to him. They ran to him and said, Rome is burning. What should we do? And he just kept playing his instrument and just ignoring it and let Rome burn down. And then he took the area that was burned and he actually gave it to himself and took it away from all the people. So a lot of people were homeless. And then the people were getting very angry at him. So then he blamed the Christians. So the Christians started the fire. They didn't. And persecution. He started persecuting the Christian ever more. There's even really sad times where he actually lit his garden with Christians. And I hate to tell you about these things, but this is how bad things got in with the Roman leadership during the time that I'm talking about. And then there was Vespasian and Titus, and they were very instrumental in the genocide of the Jews, killing millions of Jews in 70 AD, actually burning Jerusalem down. And again, I told you about how they salted the ground and destroyed it. Titus made himself a god. Most of these Caesars made themselves a god. So they felt like if the people needed to worship them, so they would obey them. So they just would say that they were a god. As Rome at that time had made many, many gods. And just another Caesar would just be another god of theirs. Then there was quite a few of them that were very immoral, and I won't get into that. So you look through this little video, you'll see that there were a lot of craziness going on too. Marcus Aurelius was another Caesar, and he tried to lead the armies and be like Julius Caesar. That didn't turn out too well. His son Commodus, decided that he was more interested in being a gladiator than ruling Rome. And this is when the Pax Romania, the Roman peace, came to an end. Commodus basically went into the arena and fought in the arena actually like 735 times. And he would stage the arena so he would always win. But one time he didn't win. One of the gladiators ended up killing him in the arena. So talk about Roman rule. The next few 200 years were very chaotic too. You'll see where the guards were taking over. A fortune seeker bought Rome at an auction. That's kind of weird, but it's in history. And one Roman ruler actually, he worshipped a former enemy of Rome, which was named Hannibal. We talked about him earlier. They also were sun worshippers and just a variety of crazy things. The second to the last emperor, as the Rome was being attacked by barbarians, he was more concerned with his chickens and his rooster, if they were okay, rather than the people. And then he made his son, who was only 16 years old, named him Romulus Augustus, which is like the legend of Romulus and Remus. And he was actually the last Caesar to rule in the western part of Rome. when the barbarians took over. Well, then we have, in between this time, and we've studied Constantine, how Constantine in 313, like he saw a cross in the sky, and then he put the cross on all their shields, and as he went to war. I don't know, if he really saw it, did this really happen, but that's what the legend says. But we know some things about Constantine is that he stopped the persecution of Christians and became a Christian himself. Was a pretty new Christian. He probably had not totally been have all the ideas of the Bible yet in his mind, but he did do some good things, and we find that Nicene Creed during that time. But Constantine's time was pretty short-lived, especially in the Western Rome. In Eastern Rome, he did build a huge city. Constantinople was the name of the city. And we'll go into the Eastern, and they called that the Byzantine Rome. The Byzantine Rome survived like 1,000 years later. Okay, that's getting pretty exhausting, isn't it? But we see the fall of Rome, and we see 40,000 Goths and Visigoths and another tribe called Vandals coming into Eastern Rome, attacking Rome. In 455 AD, the Visigoths actually came in and sacked Rome for 3 days. And then in 410, before that, the Goths were invading. And then in 476, the chief of the barbarian tribe, Odoacer, came, and actually he's the one that took Romulus off the throne, but he didn't even kill the 16-year-old boy. He let him go because he felt sorry for him, and he felt sorry for Rome. Odoacer was actually a Roman citizen even before he went to lead the barbarians against Rome. The tribe, the Vandals, came in, and they sacked Rome for like 3 weeks. Sacked means they vandalized. I don't know if you heard the word vandalize, but that's when they go out and rip and tear and destroy things. And they went in and destroyed. You see all these statues now without heads and without arms, and that was during this time. They just went and totally destroyed everything. In fact, we use the word vandalize because of the Vandals of Rome. Well, Rome fell. There's different dates on when he fell. Some call the date 410 when Rome first began to fall, all the way up to 476. But Rome fell. Now, God's perspective. Pretty exhausting, is it? What would you do if you were God? God's mercy extends in his grace to all for long periods of time. I think maybe he put up with Rome, just like he's put up with a lot of other civilizations for a long period of time. And Rome responsible for persecution of God's people. But God showed up. Let Rome destroy itself, really. So when I think of all this, I think, what history books say the reasons for Rome falling. They go into detail. But, there was a man named Augustine who lived during the time that Rome fell. And I think I went over about him before, and he was a Christian. And he said, Rome fell because of its sin. And man is seeking a city beyond this world. And we'll never find that sinless city, that government ruled by the good and the godly and the holy until we get to heaven and we see Jesus. And our city is not of this world. Our city is in heaven. I love that, what Augustine said, because basically he said the reason Rome fell was because of their sin. because we see a city that's not on this earth. And we are just pilgrims passing through.